I'm not worried because the ship is not going to sink. The Lord is still there, and things will be fine in the end. But I feel sorry for all those that keep following the world. We are supposed to be a peculiar people, not a worldly people.
Thank you, Eugene.
I just thank God for Bible expiration.
Well, while you were talking, we had a Baptist minister come up. He hunts deer on our property, and he said, "So what are you up to today?" I said, "Well, it's Feast of Tabernacles. So we're celebrating with some people online on Zoom." And he knows about it, but he's like, just miffed by what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
He's the local Baptist youth pastor.
There are a few
switching from wait. Okay, we are switching from live from Zoom to live. It's echoing. So just hold.
Thanks, Eugene.
Hey, no problem. I love it.
I had posted something about Halloween on Facebook and got a weird reply. So I asked for some Bible text.
The same as the colored.
We're having a Bible study now, and I educated her on the feast days.
That gives, I think, just about everybody a songbook to sing.
Good.
So
She
let's
was
sing number 58. Called the Salad Song.
Let me go out here and take care of this wasp nest so my niece don't get stung if she tries to get in. I'll be back later.
I like it better every day. Why? You only follow me. Started. So let me turn over 2 pages. What's that? And then here.
Say, can you hear us?
Hey Zoom, can you hear us? People on Zoom?
Nobody's doing a thing.
Oh. Well, usually if we do, if they could, we come in and go on and out. Let's do 64. Let's go to page 64.
Can you hear the singing?
It only takes a spark.
It's super, super choppy.
We got all the strings up here.
Do you hear that? Yes.
Just barely, not really enough to hear what they're saying.
Anytime he moves his camera change. They didn't hear him. Could you guys hear that?
Not really. It
Marty,
comes and
Violet?
goes, and it was choppy, and when you
I
could
can't
hear
hear
it, you
you.
could just
Oh,
barely.
mine's off. It's gonna ring, so I can't do that. Just nod if you can or you can't. Can you not hear it? The music.
We'll do it. Let's go to page 62 then.
I
They're
can
not
hear
quite
it,
ready,
Sandy.
so-
It's me, Angela.
Okay. Number 62, seek first. First place we want to seek is on Heavenly Father.
If you start hearing it, nod.
I stand in shadows see dimensions fall. And the doors will be open. Near, still near. I like that. That's a good song. Stay close to our Heavenly Father. Dear were still be.
Okay, our music just doesn't come through very well, sorry. At least you can see him playing.
Find the correct one. It's not showing up. It's sitting here. It has to be. Okay, it'll be there. It has to be on the taskbar. How come it opens up in here?
That's a PDF. That's why.
Yeah, it's a PDF file. Am I gonna need the wireless mic?
Did you want, instead of the PDF, did you want the sermon?
No, it's only the PDF.
You're gonna use a PDF
Yeah.
and then you know how to make it full screen? I don't know. Yeah, that works.
Okay. Unless I can just look it over my belt here.
This one over the one.
Yeah. Plug it in here.
Yeah.
So now, how do I share it?
Well, maybe we can do, where's this one?
You may have to right click it for a full screen.
Right click it, yeah.
There's task manager and taskbar settings. The picture's up there, but
Oh, there it is. Right, this one.
It's not there.
Oh, not there.
all these complications. Are we on the Zoom system?
Yeah, it's up there. It's on.
You can try that one. That little guy. No, okay.
I think that's width. Well, maybe that will do that. What about these over here?
Unless I just scroll through them, you know, I can just, you know, they can see the slide as long as
Yeah.
as long as they can see it. You can just go through them like that if you want. I don't know how you make PDF full screen.
How do you get rid of that? Let me put it down.
Well, that's pretty good.
Him out a little bit, maybe.
Okay. Well, hopefully this will all work. And people hear everything is the sound is coming through okay? What about for the Zoom people?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, okay. You can hear me. All right. Well,
Try here.
okay.
Do that one. You have to open it up so you can sit there.
Gracious.
Where's the share key on your Zoom?
Okay, there we go.
Gracious. Complicated, huh?
Okay, hopefully the picture comes through and the sound comes through, and hopefully we're good to go. All right. Except for that thing about internet unstable. Anyway, we have this verse from Psalm 119, verse 18. Open thou mine eyes that I may behold wondrous things out of thy Torah. And that's what we're going to be looking at today. We've had a little bit of an introduction to the Torah and how it can be relevant for us. And we'll carry on here and see what we can learn. Let's see here. How to change my slide. What else do we have to do here?
This guy didn't do anything. You don't have
The
it.
rookies aren't working. Is this thing on? Okay. Okay. Maybe now we're good to go. Okay, we have a quote here from the Bible Commentary, Volume 1. The instructions given to Moses for ancient Israel with their sharp, rigid outlines are to be studied and obeyed by the people of God today. Okay, this isn't talking about the Ten Commandments, because this is saying the instructions given to Moses for ancient Israel. So this is after God gave the Ten Commandments. These are to be studied and obeyed by the people of God today. And from Testimonies for the Church, Volume 1, that God who reads the hearts of everyone will bring to light hidden things of darkness where they are often least suspected, that stumbling blocks which have hindered the progress of truth may be removed, and God have a clean and holy people to declare his statutes and judgments. The captain of our salvation leads his people on step by step, purifying and fitting them for translation, and leaving in the rear those who are disposed to draw off from the body, who are not willing to be led and are satisfied with their own righteousness. Now, I don't want to just make the statement that those who don't keep the feasts are depending on their own righteousness and that they're going to be lost. I don't want to say that. But, there's some parts of this that I've heard varying versions of it. We were talking, actually, when we lived in Minnesota, we were answering questions about the feasts and different things like that. And some of the people there got disgusted with us. They invited John from 3ABN. What's the pastor's name? Lomacang. They invited John Lomacang there to come and speak against the feasts. And he was going to teach them that the feasts are all done away with and everything. And so we went to the session. And the first thing he did was he said, is there anybody here who actually keeps the feasts? You know, you can stand up and, you know, make a statement. And so I stood up and I was describing, you know, what we do and why and all that. And the reaction that I got from the group that was there, one of the reactions was, oh, some more things to do. Some more things that we're supposed to do. Okay, whatever. We'll be talking a little more about the statutes and judgments. We've had some introduction. We've had, you know, some applications of things, but we're going to look a little more at how we might be able to apply some of the things that are in there to our own situations today. And, you know, what I'm going to be sharing is just a small sample of what's in there. And, you know, maybe there'll be some discussion afterwards about various things, but I want to just, you know, kind of probe into some of these things, you know, the things that God gave to them. How can we apply that now? Okay. Oh boy, we're getting part of our screen cut off here. Anyway, the importance of the statutes and judgments. From Fundamentals of Christian Education, page 393, where shall we find laws more noble, pure, and just than are exhibited on the statute books, wherein is recorded the instruction given to Moses for the children of Israel? Through all time, these laws are to be perpetuated, that the character of God's people may be formed after the divine similitude. The law is a wall of protection to those who are obedient to God's precepts. And I think of the Ten Commandments, the statutes and judgments, almost like guardrails along the side of a curvy mountain road. They kind of keep you on the right way. So, from the book Education, can I actually scroll up and down with this?
Up and down, up and down.
Okay, well, we'll maybe make it work. From the book Education, page 229, here is the only safeguard for individual integrity, for the purity of the home, the well-being of society, or the stability of the nation. So she's saying, you know, at the level of the home, at the level of society, at the level of the nation, there are things here that we can apply. Amidst all of life's perplexities and dangers and conflicting claims, the one safe and sure rule is to do what God says. The statutes of the Lord are right, and he that doeth these things shall never be moved. Psalm 19, verse 8, and Psalm 15, verse 5. These directions which the Lord gave to his people express the principles of the law of the kingdom of God, and they are made specific so that the minds of the people may not be left in ignorance and uncertainty. These scriptures present the never-ceasing obligation of all whom God has blessed with life and health and advantages in temporal and spiritual things. The message, let's see here. I got to be sure I'm pushing the right button in the right direction here. It's off my screen. The message has not grown weak. Do I need to scroll some other way here? Okay, there we're at the bottom of it. The message has not grown weak because of age. God's claims are just as binding now, just as fresh in their importance as God's gifts are fresh and continual. Review and Herald, page 12, December 25th of 1900. Okay, so we're going to look at some of the statutes that God gave and think about how we can apply them. Leviticus 25, 35 to 37. If thy brother be waxen poor and fallen in decay with thee, then thou shalt relieve him. Yea, though he be a stranger or a sojourner, that he may live with thee. Take thou no usury of him or increase. In other words, be generous and don't expect more back than what you gave out. But fear thy God, that thy brother may live with thee. Thou shalt not give him thy money upon usury, nor lend him thy victuals for increase. And then Deuteronomy 15, 7 and 8, if there be among you a poor man of one of thy brethren within any of thy gates in thy land, which the Lord thy God giveth thee, thou shalt not harden thine heart, nor shut thine hand from thy poor brother, but thou shalt open thine hand wide unto him, and shalt surely lend him sufficient for his need in that which he wanteth. And it's interesting, in the various messages of the prophets, there are many places where God says, you haven't been doing what I told you to do. And he's not referring to one of the 10 commandments. He's referring many times to, you're not taking care of the poor people among you, and I'm going to punish you for it. This was pretty significant. Okay. Here for foreigners, widows, and orphans, Exodus 22, 21 to 24, thou shalt neither vex a stranger nor oppress him, for you are strangers in the land of Egypt. You shall not afflict any widow or fatherless child. If thou afflict them in any wise, and they cry at all unto me, I will surely hear their cry, and my wrath shall wax hot, and I will kill you with the sword, and your wives shall be widows, and your children fatherless. And then Isaiah 10, verse 1 and 2, woe unto them that decree unrighteous decrees and that write grievousness which they have prescribed, to turn aside the needy from judgment, and take away the right from the poor of my people, that widows may be their prey, and that they may rob the fatherless. We have the story of, let's scroll to the bottom of this one, okay? We have the story in 2 Kings where the widow of one of the sons of the prophets came to Elisha, and it says here, 2 Kings 4, now there cried a certain woman of the wives of the sons of the prophets unto Elisha, saying, thy servant my husband is dead, and thou knowest that thy servant did fear the Lord, and the creditor is come to take unto him my 2 sons to be bondmen. We have that story there where this lady was going to lose her sons because the guy that she supposedly owed money to was going to take away her sons. Well, one of the statutes was that if somebody owed you money, you could not go into their house to take their stuff. You had to stand outside and they would be bringing it out to you. So this creditor was acting outside of the law to demand her sons. He wasn't supposed to demand something in repayment, okay? Now there's application. We can think of that. Jesus said, if somebody borrows from you, don't ask it back. If they need something, give it to them. There's some principles there of being generous with people. Okay, we have this statute, Deuteronomy 23:15, thou shalt not deliver unto his master the servant which is escaped from his master unto thee. And from Testimonies, Volume 1, page 201, when the laws of men conflict with the word and law of God, we are to obey the latter, whatever the consequences may be. In other words, obey the law of God. The law of our land requiring us to deliver a slave to his master, this was written back in the 1850s and 60s. The law of our land requiring us to deliver a slave to his master, we are not to obey. And we must abide the consequences of violating this law. There were some pretty strict laws that if a slave showed up at your place, you were supposed to send him back or at least let his owner come and get him. The slave is not the property of any man. God is his rightful master, and man has no right to take God's workmanship into his hands and claim him as his own. And we have various situations in history where there were laws about, you are required to do this and this. Second World War, Hitler required that nobody could harbor a Jew. Well, you've probably all heard the story of Corrie ten Boom and her family, how that they harbored the Jews and protected them and helped them. Well, they got in big trouble for that. They ended up going to prison camp. Her sister died in prison camp. Her father died, all that kind of thing. They did what they thought was right, and they took the consequences. Well, it was like that in colonial America with the slaves. There were laws. You were required to send the slave back to the owner. We lived in Illinois for a while, and close to where we lived, there was a cemetery, an old cemetery, and there was a story about, back in the 1860s or whenever it was, I don't know just when it was, a black man escaped from the South and came to that area, and his owner came after him and shot him. Well, then he was looking for a place to bury this man, and they didn't really want to, the people in Illinois didn't believe in slavery, and so they were, there was some controversy there over what they should do. Somebody actually told this slave owner, that man that you have slung over the back of your horse is a better man than you are. So anyway. Deuteronomy 24, verse 7, if a man be found stealing any of his brethren of the children of Israel, this is talking about kidnapping or slave trade, and making merchandise of him or selleth him, that thief shall die, and thou shalt put evil away from among you. Well, nowadays we have all kinds of human trafficking and all that goes along with that, all the evil that goes along with that. Now we can't impose the death penalty. And somebody commented to me yesterday, what do we do with these statutes that say if somebody does something, you shall stone him? And it got to the point, one of the statutes was, if your son is rebellious and won't listen to you, stone him. Well, we don't do that nowadays. So how do you apply that? Well, I would say this is an example of something that God thinks of as extreme evil. Don't let it happen. If this kind of thing is going on, stop it. If there's any of this kind of evil going on in your own life, like idol worship or whatever, stop it. This is an abomination. We can't apply the death penalty, but we can do something else to solve the problem. Okay? The seventh commandment talks about adultery, but it doesn't say anything about homosexuality, not in the 10 Commandments. But in the statutes, we have quite a few things about sexual perversions. Prostitution, there shall be no whore of the daughters of Israel, nor a sodomite of the sons of Israel. Well, that's male and female issues there. Leviticus 18, verse 6, incest, none of you shall approach to any that is near kin to him to uncover their nakedness. Homosexuality, Leviticus 20, verse 13, if a man lie with mankind as he lieth with a woman, both of them have committed an abomination, they shall surely be put to death, their blood shall be upon them. And bestiality, if a man lie with a beast, he shall surely be put to death, and you shall slay the beast. If a woman approach unto a beast and lie down thereto, thou shalt kill the woman and the beast. They shall surely be put to death, their blood shall be upon them. These are some serious sexual perversions, and God didn't want anything of the sort. Now, if we didn't have these statutes, we wouldn't have much to say against the LGBT thing, because it doesn't say that in the commandments. If the commandments are the only thing that applies, we don't have a leg to stand on. Well, that's not all that applies. There's other things. This one is kind of an interesting one, Deuteronomy 22, 23 to 27. If a damsel that is a virgin be betrothed unto an husband, now this is where she is engaged to be married, and a man find her in the city and lie with her, then you shall bring them both out unto the gate of that city, and you shall stone them with stones that they die. The damsel, because she cried not, being in the city, and the man, because he hath humbled his neighbor's wife. Now that's saying that a woman that is engaged to be married is of the same category as one that is married, because this guy has defiled his neighbor's wife. So shall you put away evil from among you. But this is a different situation. If a man find a betrothed damsel in the field, and the man force her and lie with her, then the man only that lay with her shall die. But unto the damsel thou shalt do nothing. There is in the damsel no sin worthy of death. For as when a man riseth against his neighbor and slayeth him, even so is this matter. For he found her in the field, and the betrothed damsel cried, and there was none to save her. Now, there's a few assumptions that are in here. If this happens in the city, it's assumed that the young lady would cry for help, and it's assumed that somebody would help her. Well, if this thing happens, you can assume that she must not have cried for help. So she is an accomplice to the crime. Because if she had cried for help, somebody would have helped her. Now, the poor lady that's out in the field, even if she cries for help and there's nobody around, she can't escape. So it's assumed that she cried and nobody came to help her. And so she's not an accomplice to the crime. So there's a difference here in the situation. Now I want to throw in another verse here. This is from the New Testament. 1 Corinthians 10:13, there hath no temptation taken you, but such as is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not suffer you to be tempted above that you are able, but will with the temptation also make a way to escape, that you may be able to bear it. God gives a way to escape. If we don't ask for help, then we must be an accomplice. So he's saying, you know, if you ask for help, I'll deliver you. But if you don't ask for help, I'm not going to do anything. Paying wages. Deuteronomy 24:14 and 15. Thou shalt not oppress a hired servant that is poor and needy, whether he be of thy brethren or of the strangers that is within thy land, that are in thy land within thy gates. So this is talking about Israelites and travelers that happen to be coming through. At his day thou shalt give him his hire, neither shall the sun go down upon it, for he is poor, and setteth his heart upon it, lest he cry against thee unto the Lord, and it be sin unto thee. We saw this illustrated in India. You know, a lot of people are very poor. They work for the equivalent of about $1.50 or $2 a day. And if they don't get paid that day that they worked, they don't have food for the next day. And so it's important for them to be paid on the day they work so they can provide for their family the next day. And I think this is the same type of thing. You know, this poor guy needs that now so that he can buy what his family needs. Now, you know, nowadays you get paid by the week or by bi-weekly, monthly, whatever. There's other applications, but you owe it to your employee to pay him for his work. Okay. This one is kind of interesting, and there could be quite a bit of discussion on it. Leviticus 19:19, you shall keep my statutes. You shall not let your cattle gender with a diverse kind. Thou shalt not sow thy field with mingled seed, neither shall a garment mingled of linen and woolen come upon thee. And then Deuteronomy 22:9, thou shalt not sow thy vineyard with diverse seeds, lest the fruit of thy seed which thou hast sown and the fruit of thy vineyard be defiled. Well, as far as breeding cattle of different breeds and all that, I don't know what to say about that. Or a mule is a combination of a horse and a donkey. They used mules in the Old Testament. So I'm not sure what about how to apply the animal gendering with diverse kinds. But mingled seed, I'm guessing that this would probably cover GMOs, because that is mingling stuff that wasn't originally there. You know, genetically modified stuff. That's the way I would apply that. And, you know, there's a lot of research. Of course, the laboratories that do the GMO stuff, they say, oh, there's nothing wrong with it. It's no different than, you know, your regular stuff. But there must be some kind of difference, because animals can tell the difference between GMO food and regular food. And one of our friends, her daughter, worked as a biophysicist or something. Anyhow, she was working in some research on GMOs. And she told her mom, I can't tell you very much about this kind of stuff, but what I can tell you is it raises havoc with your gut. Okay, so there's probably a good reason why God would say this, and I think we can apply it to genetically modified stuff. Okay, the sabbatical year, Leviticus 25:1-7, where God told them to let the land rest every 7 years. And also it would give their servants and you know, the animals and everything a rest. And so every seventh year, they would let the land just go. They wouldn't plant it. And says, that which groweth of its own accord of thy harvest thou shalt not reap, neither gather the grapes of thy vine undressed, for it is a year of rest unto the land. And the Sabbath of the land shall be meat for you and your servant, and for your maid, and for your hired servant, and for the stranger that sojourns with thee, and for thy cattle, and for the beast that's in the land, shall all the increase thereof be for meat. there would be volunteer things that would grow. And so the poor people could just come in and whatever they could get off of that land, the person that owned the land could harvest whatever was there, whatever came just spontaneously as volunteer crops. But God also told them that he would bless the year before so that they would have enough for that year. So, there's some blessings there. Also in the 7th year, Deuteronomy 15, 1-3, at the end of every 7 years, thou shalt make a release. And this is the manner of the release. Every creditor that lendeth aught unto his neighbor shall release it. He shall not exact it of his neighbor or of his brother, because it is called the Lord's release. Of a foreigner thou mayest exact it again, but that which is thine with thy brother, thy hand shall release. And the way I understand it is, if somebody owed money, they had borrowed money somewhere during the 6 years, when the 7th year came along, that debt was just forgiven. It was just wiped out. They could still take it, they could still ask it from a foreigner that had borrowed money, but from their own Israelite brothers, they were supposed to just wipe out the debt. And my thought on that is, if the wealthy person that had borrowed the money to the poor person could afford to borrow it to him, he didn't really need it himself. He could let it go and he wouldn't need it because he got along for 6 years without it. He can get along from there on without it also. And the prophets came to the people and said, 2 Chronicles 36:21, to fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, until the land hath enjoyed her Sabbaths, for as long as she lay desolate, she kept Sabbath to fulfill 70 years. He said, you will be in captivity for 70 years. And for every one of those years, it's one of those 7th years that you didn't observe that I'm going to force you to observe now. The land will get its rest because you didn't let it rest before. And we've kind of started doing that. We tried to figure out when the sabbatical year would probably be in our calendar. And I think it was 2 years ago, we thought, okay, this is a sabbatical year. We will not plant a garden. So we let the garden go. I had to kind of deal with the weeds in it because, if you don't do something, you just get totally overrun with weeds. But we didn't plant anything. And we had plenty of food. We didn't run short just because we didn't have a garden that year. So anyhow, there are ways of applying that. The Jubilee year was the 50th year, and the Lord is saying, Leviticus 25, 8-13, thou shalt number 7 Sabbaths of years unto thee, 7 times 7, and the space of the 7 Sabbaths of years shall be unto thee 49 years. That's easy to figure out. Then thou shalt cause the trumpet of the Jubilee to sound on the 10th day of the 7th month. In the day of atonement shall you make the trumpet sound throughout all your land, and you shall hallow the 50th year and proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. It shall be a jubilee unto you, and you shall return every man unto his possession, and you shall return every man unto his family. Anyhow, this was kind of the ultimate return of any property or whatever to the original owners. Because, sometimes a family would get into financial trouble and they would ask a neighbor, a wealthy neighbor, can I mortgage my land to you and you give me some cash so that I can keep going and I'll work for you during that time, and we'll make this deal. So he was kind of an indentured servant for this period of time. But at the end of that time, the property went back to the original owners, and any servant arrangement was canceled out, and everything was back to the way it originally was, so that the family could carry on with their own land. They could work their own land and do what they needed to do to make a living. And then in Leviticus 25:23, the land shall not be sold forever, for the land is mine. You are strangers and sojourners with me. So it's like God says, I own the land. You're just tenants on the land. So it doesn't belong to you to sell to somebody else. It belongs to me, and I'm letting you use it. I've got some things here that Ellen White wrote to Stephen Haskell and his wife. She was in Australia at the time, and she wrote to them And she says, I have things to send to you in writing that I deem very important, and I think it'll be prepared in a form so that many may be benefited by it. So she thought this should be shared with others. I should oft be so pleased to have talks with you upon matters that are intensely interesting to me that I am trying to write out in reference to the specifications and scriptural injunctions in regard to the duties one to another in Leviticus and Deuteronomy. We must just call to our minds those precepts on actual practical missionary work and work intelligently and do the very principles of Christianity, the gospel of the Old Testament. And then she talks about the 7th year, sabbatical year. This would be a wonderful arrangement down in this age of great light. Not only the agricultural processes were to be intermitted, but the cultivation of the soil was not permitted. It lay in its spontaneous growth for the benefit of the poor. All had free access to it. And she talks a little more about that. Then she talks about the Jubilee, the 50th year. The lessons given were to encourage liberality and overcome all stinginess, and give lessons to all that it was the Lord's land. He was to be regarded as its owner, that he would make it productive if they were obedient by giving them his blessing upon their lands. So she's saying, you know, these are some significant things that if we followed these things, there would be a great benefit in it. Okay, so she was saying, you know, literally having the 7th year, sabbatical year, and the 50th year, the Jubilee year, there's blessings in the literal doing of that. And then in the Review and Herald, she uses that as a symbol of what's going to happen in the future. As God spoke the day and hour of Jesus coming and delivered the everlasting covenant to his people, he spoke one sentence and then paused while the words were rolling through the earth. This is at the very end, as Jesus is coming, and you know, as things are happening, and we're taken up. And I'll read the end of that first paragraph there. When the never-ending blessing was pronounced on those who had honored God in keeping his Sabbath holy, there was a mighty shout of victory over the beast and over his image. Then commenced the Jubilee, when the land should rest. I saw the pious slave rise in triumph and victory and shake off the chains that bound him, while his wicked master was in confusion and knew not what to do. So she's using the Jubilee, the 50th year Jubilee, as a symbol of our final deliverance from all of the problems on this earth, all the bad situations. This is final deliverance. We are totally free now in God's kingdom. So that's a kind of a unique application of that. Deuteronomy 23, verse 21, when thou shalt make a vow unto the Lord thy God, thou shalt not slack to pay it, for the Lord thy God will surely require it of thee, and it would be sin in thee. If you make a promise to God, follow through with it. Ecclesiastes 5, verse 4 and 5, when thou vowest a vow unto God, defer not to pay it, for he hath no pleasure in fools. Pay that which thou hast vowed. Better is it that thou shouldst not vow than that thou shouldst vow and not pay. Okay, if we make a promise, we need to keep it. Now we can apply that in various ways in our personal lives. But one thing that I've thought of is God wants us to be like him. When he makes a promise, he keeps his promise, even if it's difficult. You know, there were a lot of times when it was hard for him to let his people go on and do some of the stuff. And he told them, if you keep doing that, I'm going to punish you. Well, there were times when he punished them. Sometimes he forgave them. But when it came to his blessings, if he said, I will bless you, he followed through with that. He wants us to be like him. If we make a promise, follow through with it. Okay. Getting on down into Leviticus 11. This is where he talks about all the clean and unclean creatures, food and not food. And we'll talk about birds here. First of all, these are they which you shall have in abomination among the fowls. They shall not be eaten. They are an abomination. And then he lists all these different kinds of birds that they should not eat. And pretty much consistently through this list, these are all either carnivorous birds or scavengers. Okay. The only birds that we know for sure are clean, because this is a list that actually gives the names of the birds, and it doesn't tell us which ones are clean, but we can assume that doves were clean and that quail were clean, because he did give them quail for eating, and doves were part of the sacrificial system. They had to have clean creatures for sacrifices. So we know that those two are clean. But nowadays, I mean, people assume that chicken is clean and that turkey is clean. But if you know anything about commercially raising those birds, they feed them all kinds of stuff to make them grow fast and, high protein and whatever. And a lot of that is not vegetable matter. So I'd be real hesitant about calling chickens and turkeys clean. And I know that ducks eat more than plant food. Geese, I'm not so sure about them, because I've seen them out actually grazing on grass. But what? Okay. So, as far as clean and unclean birds, the only ones we know for sure are the quail and the doves. Well, you'll have to take that for what it's worth. As far as what you're going to eat, better to avoid all of them. Okay. So here we have pictures of clean and unclean. The quail is up on the left side. The doves are up on the right side. The rest of those, a lot of them are scavengers, and then you got the chickens and the turkeys. You'll have to decide how you want to apply that. Clean and unclean animals. The carcasses of every beast which divideth the hoof and is not cloven-footed, nor cheweth the cud, are unclean unto you. Every one that toucheth them shall be unclean. Whatsoever goeth upon paws among all manner of beasts that go on all four, those are unclean unto you. Whoso toucheth their carcass shall be unclean until evening. He that beareth their carcass of them shall wash his clothes and be unclean until the evening. Okay, the ones that are clean are the ones that have a split hoof and chew the cud. Okay, deer, cows, sheep, goats, all those. Nowadays, any of those that are raised commercially, that's kind of questionable, because they got all kinds of other stuff, hormones and whatever, that I would avoid. Wild ones, they're technically clean, but every once in a while you hear the game and fish department or whatever talking about wasting disease or this or that disease in the wild deer and whatever. So that's kind of questionable too. Leviticus 11, verse 39 and 40. Now, the first part of this talked about those that are definitely unclean. If you touch the dead body of the animal, you are unclean. You should launder your clothes and bathe, and then you can be considered clean. But it goes on in Leviticus 11, 39 and 40, if any beast of which you may eat, now these are clean beasts, if one of them dies, he that toucheth the carcass thereof shall be unclean until evening. He that eateth of the carcass of it shall wash his clothes and be unclean. So even clean beasts, if they died of themselves, they weren't supposed to eat it. They weren't supposed to touch it. It was just as unclean as a dead pig. Now, as far as touching the carcass of a clean or unclean animal, what about mounted animals? What about pigskin gloves? Alligator shoes? Whatever. You can apply that in all kinds of leather products or whatever. Football. Okay. It might be a good idea to read the labels when you're going to buy a pair of gloves. Calf skin rather than pig skin, whatever. Personal property. Thou shalt not remove thy neighbor's landmark, which they of old time have set in thine inheritance, which thou shalt inherit in the land that the Lord thy God giveth thee to possess it. That's Deuteronomy 19, verse 14, and Deuteronomy 27, verse 17. Cursed be he that removeth his neighbor's landmark, and all the people shall say amen. Private property ownership is biblical. Of course, back in those days, God says, I own the property, you're using it. Well, nowadays we have, private property. Well, one of the agendas of the United Nations and the World Economic Forum is you will own nothing and you'll be happy. That's not biblical. Okay. Capital punishment. Numbers 35, 31, 33. You shall take no satisfaction for the life of a murderer, which is guilty of death, but he shall be surely put to death. So you shall not pollute the land wherein you are, for blood defileth the land, and the land cannot be cleansed of the blood that is shed therein, but by the blood of him that sheddeth it. And back in Genesis 9, verse 6, right after the flood, God told Noah, whoso sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed, for in the image of God made he man. Capital punishment is biblical. Now, I'm not going to say how that should be applied because there's all kinds of laws in the land. Different states have different laws and all that, but capital punishment is biblical. We'll just leave it at that. This one is kind of interesting. Numbers 35, 9 through 12, the cities of refuge. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, When you come over Jordan into the land of Canaan, then you shall appoint you cities to be cities of refuge for you, that the slayer may flee thither, which killeth any person at unawares, and they shall be unto you cities for refuge from the avenger, that the manslayer die not until he stand before the congregation in judgment. Well, back in those days, it was fairly common for, if somebody got killed, another family member would go after the murderer and kill him. And, sometimes it turned into a family feud type thing. And God says, okay, let's do this in an orderly way. If anybody gets killed, the person responsible has a place that he can go where he is protected until it can be brought before the judges. So the city of refuge was for any person who had killed another person. They could go there until there was a proper trial, and they were protected. Now, in the trial, if the person was found guilty of murder, where they purposely did this, they held a grudge against their neighbor, and they finally killed him. If he was actually a murderer, he was put out of the city of refuge, and it was the responsibility of the nearest relative to kill that murderer. And the nearest relative was called the Goel, the avenger. It was his responsibility to do that. But if the person that had killed the other person, they found out that it was just an accident or whatever, he wasn't just released and acquitted. He was declared not guilty so that he couldn't be killed by the avenger, but he couldn't go home either. He had to stay in the city of refuge or until the high priest died. Now, that's kind of an interesting arrangement. Killing another person is a terrible thing to do, even if it's an accident. And so there were repercussions for doing it. When the high priest died, then that person was legally protected anywhere he went. But until the high priest died, if he went out of the city of refuge, he wasn't protected anymore. So there's some interesting ramifications to that law. Now, something that's interesting. On the island of Hawaii, there is, from ancient times, a city of refuge. It's called Pu'uhonawa. I don't even know if I can pronounce that name there. Pu'uhonawa, whatever. Anyhow, it's a national park now. And there's an interesting story behind it. I've got a little reading here that this National Historic Park is located on the west coast of the island of Hawaii. The historical park preserves the site where, up until the early 19th century, Hawaiians who broke a kapu, which was one of the ancient laws, could avoid certain death by fleeing to this place of refuge, or the pu'uhonua. Kapu means forbidden. So they had laws that were, if you did this, this was capital punishment. In this system of law, it was kapu, or forbidden, when entering a chief's personal area to come in contact with his hair or fingernail clippings, to look directly at him, or to be in sight of him with a head higher than his. So these were forbidden. If you did any of these things, that was a death sentence. Wearing red and yellow feathers, which was a sign of royalty, was kapu, unless an individual was of the highest rank. Men and women could not eat meals together, Certain foods such as pork, most types of bananas and coconuts were considered kapu to women. And there were many other things that were kapu. But if you did one of these things and you could flee to this pu honua, the priests in this location could, I don't know what they would call it, they could acquit you or whatever, and you couldn't be killed. It was their duty to do that for anybody that was able to reach this city of refuge. And so, that was almost like the old cities of refuge, which those were for a murdering case. This is for all these kapu. So anyhow, this was an interesting deal. And when I was reading about this in Wikipedia, it was interesting that the priests of this place, the old Hawaiian name for the priest was Kahuna. The Hebrew name for priest is Kohen. The words are very similar. Now, I don't know if the language is related, but I thought that was interesting. So, now we have some care for animals. Exodus 23, 4 and 5, if thou meet thine enemy's ox or his ass going astray, thou shalt surely bring it back to him. Now, this is an animal that belongs to your enemy. You're supposed to be civil enough to take it back, even if you hated the guy, or if he hated you. If thou see the ass of him that hateth thee lying under his burden, and wouldst forbear to help him, thou shalt surely help with him. So they were required. It didn't matter who this belonged to. If it was your enemy, you are required to help. And then Proverbs 12, verse 10, a righteous man regardeth the life of his beast. Nowadays it's almost getting to the point where animals are more important than people. But anybody that has an animal, they are responsible to take good care of it, no matter what the situation is. We are not supposed to abuse animals. Ellen White goes so far as to categorize sport hunting as a sin because you are killing God's animals just for fun. This one has to do with clothing. The woman shall not wear that which pertaineth unto a man, neither shall a man put on a woman's garment, for all that do so are abomination unto the Lord thy God. Nowadays, there's times when you look at somebody walking down the street, you don't know if they're male or female. And Ellen White talks about this situation, and she says, this will lead to confusion of the sexes. Well, what do we have nowadays? We have all kinds of confusion with all letters of the alphabet being put on somebody. But even these signs that you find on public restrooms can show the difference between a man and a woman. Another situation, Ellen White has a lot to say about dress reform for women. She also talks about dress reform for men. And one of the subjects one of the contexts where she brings that up is what we should be wearing when we come into the house of the Lord. Now, we attend a church. It's not an Adventist church. It's a Church of God Seventh Day, and we really appreciate the people there. We've had really good fellowship, but it bothers me that they come there in their everyday clothes, their blue jeans and whatever. It's like they don't change clothes for Sabbath. If you were going to go and meet with some high official, governor or president, whoever, somebody that you have great respect for, that's, really high ranking, you might say, would you go there in your shorts and flip-flops and a t-shirt? What should we dress like when we're coming to meet with the sovereign of the universe? Think about that. God had a lot to say about proper justice. Exodus 23, verse 3, neither shalt thou countenance a poor man in his cause. And when you read the context of that, it's saying, if a poor man comes to court for something, you shouldn't favor him just because he's poor. Poor man, rich man, they're all on the same level before the court of justice. Leviticus 19:15, you shall do no unrighteousness in judgment. Thou shalt not respect the person of the poor. It's kind of saying the same thing, nor honor the person of the mighty, but in righteousness shalt thou judge thy neighbor. It talks about that God is no respecter of persons. That applies here too. Deuteronomy 16, verse 19, thou shalt not wrest judgment. Thou shalt not respect persons, neither take a gift or a bribe, for a gift doth blind the eyes of the wise and pervert the words of the righteous. And Deuteronomy 27, verse 19, cursed be he that perverteth the judgment of the stranger, that is a foreigner, a traveler, or whatever, fatherless and widow. God was very particular that they should be fair in all of their legal dealings. Everybody is on equal footing before the law. Talking about personal liability, Deuteronomy 22, verse 8, when thou buildest a new house, then thou shalt make a battlement for thy roof, that thou bring not blood upon thine house if any man fall from thence. That's talking about a flat roof. When we were in India, almost all the houses had flat roofs, and they would usually have a place up there where they could go. They'd have a wall around it that you could go up there. You could sleep at night because sometimes in the house it was really hot, so they'd sleep on top of the house. We did that when we were there. You would have our beds up there. It was usually a little bit cooler up there. But here they're told, put a barrier around the edge of your roof so that people don't fall off. Okay. Exodus 22, 5 and 6. If a man shall cause a field or vineyard to be eaten, and shall put in his beast, and shall feed in another man's field, of the best of his own field and of the best of his own vineyard shall he make restitution. So if your animal eats from your neighbor's stuff, you pay him back. The value, whatever is equal value, you pay back. If a fire break out and catch in thorns, so that the stacks of corn or the standing corn or the field be consumed therewith, he that kindleth the fire shall surely make restitution. So if they were, anything that happened like that, if you were the cause of the loss, you make restitution. This one is talking about liability again, and it's pretty serious. Exodus 21, 28 and 29, if an ox gore a man or a woman that they die, in other words, this is a vicious animal, then the ox shall be surely stoned and his flesh shall not be eaten, but the owner of the flesh of the ox shall be quit. But if the ox were wont to push with his horn in time past, if he had ever done this before, and it hath been testified to his owner, and he hath not kept him in, but that he hath killed a man or a woman, the ox shall be stoned, and his owner also shall be put to death. Now, who is the responsible person here? The ox did the work, but the owner is the responsible party. So the owner is the murderer. Now, that's kind of hard to swallow, but Ellen White has some interesting things to say there. Ministry of Healing, page 343. The man who has a vicious beast and who, knowing its disposition, allows it liberty, is by the laws of the land held accountable for the evil the beast may do. In the laws given to Israel, the Lord directed that when a beast known to be vicious caused the death of a human being, the life of the owner should pay the price of his carelessness or malignity. On the same principle, the government that licenses the liquor seller should be held responsible for the results of his traffic. If it is a crime worthy of death to give liberty to a vicious beast, how much greater is the crime of sanctioning the work of the liquor seller? That's a good reason for abolitionist laws. Who's responsible if the drunk goes out and kills somebody? Or he goes home and beats up his wife? Or whatever? Who's responsible? Exodus 21, 22 and 23. If men strive and hurt a woman with child so that her fruit depart from her, and yet no mischief follow. Now that sounds like spontaneous abortion or miscarriage or something like that. He shall be surely punished according as the woman's husband will lay upon him, and he shall pay as the judgments determine. So this is if the mother gives birth at the wrong time, but the baby lives. There should be some compensation there. If any mischief follow, then thou shalt give life for life. Now that's talking about if the baby dies because of this situation. Life for life. What does that say about abortion? Where they are purposely killing the baby. What category does that put the abortionist into? Deuteronomy 20, verse 19 and 20. When thou shalt besiege a city a long time and making war against it to take it, thou shalt not destroy the trees thereof by forcing an axe against them. For thou mayest eat of them, and thou shalt not cut them down. For the tree of the field is man's life. You shall not cut them down to employ them in the siege. Fruit trees were valuable. Only the trees which thou knowest that they be not trees for meat, thou shalt destroy and cut them down. Thou shalt build bulwarks against the city that maketh war against thee until it be subdued. Of course, nowadays we're not doing stuff like that, but I think this is just a reminder, conserve nature. Don't waste it. Deuteronomy 22, verse 6 and 7, if a bird's nest chance to be before thee in the way, in any tree or on the ground, whether they be young ones or eggs, and the dam sitting upon the young or upon the eggs, thou shalt not take the dam with the young, but thou shalt in any wise let the dam go, and take the young to thee, that it may be well with thee, and that thou mayest prolong thy days. Let the mother go. She can raise another batch. Okay? Conservation. Be careful of these things. Two or more witnesses. We've heard this in various contexts. Numbers 35:30, whoso killeth any person, the murderer shall be put to death by the mouth of witnesses. But one witness shall not testify against any person to cause him to die. So even if that person was, or where it looked like they were definitely a murderer, if it was only by the word of one person, they were not to be put to death. There had to be two or more. Deuteronomy 17, verse 6, at the mouth of two witnesses or three witnesses shall he that is worthy of death be put to death, but at the mouth of one witness he shall not be put to death. And then Deuteronomy 19:15, one witness shall not rise up against a man for any iniquity or for any sin in any sin that he sinneth. At the mouth of two witnesses or at the mouth of three witnesses shall the matter be established. So it was always required to have at least two. And it's kind of interesting. There's various situations in the Bible where this principle shows up. When Jesus and the two angels came to Abraham and said that they were going down to Sodom, two angels went to Sodom to check it out. That was two witnesses. There's various places where two witnesses show up. Oops. How do I get rid of this little box here?
You can just click on your screen.
I don't have any control of my screen. Okay, there we go. Okay, talking about tithe and offering. Testimonies, Volume 4, page 467. At stated periods, in order to preserve the integrity of the law, the people were interviewed as to whether they had faithfully performed their vows or not. A conscientious few made returns to God of about 1/3 of all their income for the benefit of religious interests and for the poor. These exactions were not from a particular class of the people, but from all, the requirement being proportioned according to the amount possessed. So it was kind of a percentage type thing. Besides all these systematic and regular donations, there were special objects calling for free will offerings, such as the tabernacle built in the wilderness and the temple erected at Jerusalem. These drafts were made by God upon the people for their own good, as well as to sustain his service. So there it's saying about 1/3 of their income. So that's tithe plus offerings. Okay? And there's a place, I forget where it is, but where when the person had brought their offerings after a certain amount of time, they were supposed to make the statement, I have given this much offering, I have not kept it back. I don't remember where that is, but that was a statement, and that's what Ellen White is referring to, that they were interviewed as to whether they had faithfully performed their views, or their vows, I mean. So, the tithe was given to the Levites for their support because they didn't have property of their own to make a living on. Behold, I have given the children of Levi all the tenth in Israel for an inheritance for their service, which they serve, even the service of the tabernacle of the congregation. So the tribe of Levite received the tithe from the other tribes. Well, then the Levites gave tithe of what they had to the high priest. There was never a requirement for the high priest to pay tithe, because who would he pay it to? But the tithe was brought in that way to the Levites, and then they paid to the high priest. So that was the regular 1/10 tithe. Well, there was also what seems to be a second tithe, and the Jews have this in their way of doing things. Deuteronomy 14:22-27, thou shalt surely tithe all the increase of thy seed that the field bringeth forth year by year. Okay, the tithe that I just had on the last screen was to go to the Levites. This tithe, it says, thou shalt eat before the Lord thy God in the place which he shall choose to place his name there, the tithe of thy corn, thy wine, thy oil, and the firstlings of thy herds and thy flocks, that thou mayest learn to fear the Lord thy God always. And thou shalt eat there before the Lord thy God, and thou shalt rejoice, thou and thy household, and the Levite that is within thy gates. Thou shalt not forsake him, for he hath no part nor inheritance with thee. This is a different tithe. This is a second tithe that they were supposed to take to the tabernacle or to the temple and have a good meal with the Levite and the poor. And I think it goes on in the next verse, Deuteronomy 14, verse 28 and 29. And then at the end of 3 years, thou shalt bring forth all the tithe of thine increase from that year, and shall lay it up within thy gates. So for 2 years, they would take it to the temple and have a good meal there with all the underprivileged ones. And then the third year, they would keep it at home. And the Levite, because he hath no part nor inheritance with thee, and the stranger, and the fatherless, and the widow, which are within thy gates, shall come, and thou shalt eat and be and they shall eat and be satisfied, that the Lord thy God may bless thee in all the work of thine hand which thou doest. This isn't the same as the tithe that went to the Levites. This is a different tithe. 2 years they went to the tabernacle and celebrated there. The third year, they could do it at home, and they invited all the underprivileged ones to join them at their home. So, first and second tithe, and then we have the burnt offering. This was something that was done at the tabernacle. Patriarchs and Prophets, page 352, describes it. Every morning and evening, a lamb of a year old was burned upon the altar with its appropriate meat offering, thus symbolizing the daily consecration of the nation to Jehovah and their constant dependence upon the atoning blood of Christ. This morning and evening, the continual burnt offering, we sometimes think of a burnt offering as being a sin offering. Well, it was a little bit that, but it's more of a consecration offering, almost like for the whole nation. That morning and evening burnt offering was kind of an offering to consecrate the whole nation to God. And it was morning and evening. Well, then we have this little quote from Steps to Christ: consecrate yourself to God in the morning. Make this your very first work. And I think this is kind of our version of the burnt offering, morning and evening. Let your prayer be, take me, O Lord, as wholly thine. I lay all my plans at thy feet. Use me today in thy service. Abide with me, and let all my work be wrought in thee. This is a daily matter. Each morning, consecrate yourself to God for that day. Surrender all your plans to him to be carried out or given up as his providence shall indicate. Thus, day by day, you may be giving your life into the hands of God, and thus your life will be molded more and more after the life of Christ. So that can be our application of the morning and evening burnt offering. A burnt offering was completely burned on the altar. There was no part of it that the priest kept or anything. The only thing they took out was the blood. Otherwise, the whole animal was burnt on the altar. We are to dedicate our whole life to God. morning and evening. First fruits. The first of the first fruits of thy land thou shalt bring unto the house of the Lord thy God. So we're talking about tithe. We talked about burnt offering. Here we're talking about first fruits. That's kind of the first thing that you harvest. Well, for us personally, when we have our garden producing things, whatever the first production is, if it's carrots or potatoes or tomatoes or whatever, we'll try to find somebody that maybe doesn't have a garden or that can appreciate it, a neighbor, a pastor, our local senior citizen center or whatever. We'll take some of that first harvest and just give it to them. Here's, if you can use this, we're just letting you have it. It's a gift from us. That's our way of applying the first fruits offering. Trespass offering. Now this one is kind of interesting because it's talking about situations where you do something against your neighbor or against someone that causes a loss to them. That's kind of the concept of trespass. The Lord spake unto Moses, saying, if a soul sin and commit a trespass against the Lord, and lie unto his neighbor in that which was delivered him to keep, or in fellowship, or anything taken away by violence. So it's talking about things that you have that belong to somebody else, or have found of that which was lost, and lieth concerning it, and sweareth falsely in any of all these that a man doeth, sinning therein, then it shall be, because he hath sinned and is guilty, that he shall restore that which he took violently away. Now, this may be a situation where you make a mistake or you borrow something and, it gets lost or whatever, something about a loss to another person. And, there's these various situations that are described here. All that about which he hath sworn falsely, he shall restore it in the principal and shall add a fifth part more thereto. That's adding 20%. If you have whatever it is, when you return it to the rightful owner, add something to it. Now, I don't know just how to apply that all the time, but, it's saying return it and, give some extra compensation. And he shall bring his trespass offering unto the Lord. And it describes the trespass offering there. So, you're supposed to return it plus some compensation. And another part of that, Numbers 5, verse 5 and 8, 5 through 8, the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, speak unto the children of Israel, when a man or woman shall commit any sin that men commit to do a trespass against the Lord, and that person be guilty. Now, this is talking about doing something against the Lord too. It's against another person or against the Lord, where you're not giving them what belongs to them. Then they shall confess their sin which they have done, and he shall recompense his trespass with the principal thereof, and add unto it a fifth part thereto, and give it unto him against whom he hath trespassed. Okay. I'll leave that, but I'll give an application from Ellen White, Testimonies for the Church, Volume 5, talking about Zacchaeus. And this is the letter she wrote to a man who had been doing some dishonest things in his business dealings. And she says, Zacchaeus declared, if I have taken anything from any man by false accusation, I restore him fourfold. Now, that was a pretty big compensation to restore. You, talking to this man that had done these things, you could at least have made efforts to correct your acts of injustice to your fellow men. You cannot make every case right, for some whom you have injured have gone into their graves, and the account stands registered against you. In these cases, the best you can do is to bring a trespass offering to the altar of the Lord, and he will accept and pardon you. But where you can, you should make reparation to the wronged ones. Okay? Now, this next one from the Review and Herald is talking about things that happen within a family. Let the members of every family begin to work over against their own houses. Let them humble themselves before God. It would be well to have a trespass offering box in sight, and have all the household agree that whosoever speaks unkindly of another or utters angry words shall drop into the trespass offering box a certain sum of money. Interesting way of doing this. This would put them upon their guard against the wicked words which work injury, not only to their brethren, but to themselves. No man of himself can tame the unruly member, the tongue, but God will do the work for him who comes unto him with contrite heart and faith and with humble supplication. By the help of God, bridle your tongues, talk less and pray more. So a trespass offering within the family would be kind of paying a fine for what you did to somebody else in the family. It might remind you, don't do that. It costs. Yeah. False prophets, Deuteronomy 13, verse 1 to 4. If there arise among you a prophet or a dreamer of dreams, and giveth thee a sign or a wonder, and the sign or the wonder come to pass. Now, this is somebody that's saying, I'm a prophet and I can do this miracle. And the sign or wonder come to pass wherever he spake unto thee, saying, Let us go after other gods, which thou hast not known, and let us serve them. Thou shalt not hearken unto the words of that prophet or that dreamer of dreams. She's basically saying, it doesn't matter what kind of miracle he does. He's a false prophet if he leads you away from God. Miracles are not a sign of a true prophet. Anyhow, she says, you're supposed to deal with him. Revelation 13, 11 through 14. I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had two horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon, and he exercised all the power of the first beast before him, and causeth the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed, and he doeth great wonders, so that he maketh fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men, and deceiveth them that dwell on the earth by means of those miracles which he had power to do in the sight of the beast. In the end of time, miracles are no indication of truth, because the devil can work miracles. Okay. Deuteronomy 7, 25 and 26. The graven images of their gods shall you burn with fire. You shall not desire the silver or gold that is in them, nor take it unto thee. They had golden idols, they had silver idols that were worth a lot because of the silver and gold that were in them. And God is saying, don't even keep the silver and gold. Get rid of the whole thing. Neither shalt thou bring an abomination into thy house, lest thou be a cursed thing like it. Thou shalt utterly detest it, and shalt utterly abhor it, for it is a cursed thing. And then in Acts 19, verse 19, where the people of, I think it was Ephesus, the magicians in Ephesus brought their books together and burned them. It says, many of them also which used curious arts brought their books together and burned them before all men, and they counted the price of them and found it 50,000 pieces of silver. Those books were valuable. 50,000 pieces of silver is approximately 200 years of wages. That was some valuable stuff. They just burned it. Deuteronomy 20, verse 16 through 18. But of the cities of these people, which the Lord thy God doth give thee for an inheritance, thou shalt save alive nothing that breatheth. Thou shalt utterly destroy them. Namely, and then she lists all the tribes there, as the Lord thy God hath commanded thee, that they teach you not to do after their abominations, which they have done unto their gods, so should you sin against the Lord your God. There's various ways that this could be applied. Some people, when they go traveling to foreign countries, they bring back statues and trinkets and whatnot from those foreign countries. Some of those are religious trinkets, statues of Buddha or whatever. Is that an abomination also? You're dealing with things that are gods to other people, even though they may not be your God. But here, God is telling them, get rid of that stuff. We had a friend of ours who had grown up on the street. She had lived a terrible lifestyle, but she became a Christian, and she was a very sincere person. She would pray about everything, and some of the other Adventists, they didn't like her because she would kind of be a rebuke to them, because she was so sincere and so faithful in her Christianity, and it kind of made them look like they weren't on the same level. But anyhow, in one of the houses that she lived in for a while, she would get a headache every time she went upstairs. And there were even other people that visited her that would get a headache when they went upstairs. And she was thinking, what's wrong with this? What's going on here? When she'd go back downstairs, it would go away. And so she was trying to think, well, what's up here that's, bringing this on? She finally remembered that she had a whole collection of Elvis Presley records. And she thought, this might be it. She destroyed the whole lot and the headaches quit. She didn't go and sell them on eBay or whatever. She got rid of them. And the headaches quit. There's things, we've heard various stories about people that have had any contact with demon worship and stuff like that. And I've never experienced it myself, but they say that if you have any object in your home that came from a demon devil worshiper, that gives the devil access to your house. We heard where somebody had a lawnmower that was given them, and that brought the devil into their house. Another one that had a Bible that was given to them from a devil worshiper, and it caused them problems. That's hard to understand, but there's something to that. I'm just going to throw this in. This isn't really the same subject, but we were listening to a lady who had been into Satanism and all that kind of stuff, and she became a Christian. I don't even know if her husband was a Christian, but the devil came back and wanted access to her. But he had to go through her husband to get permission from her husband to have access to her. He could not get to her except with permission from her husband. Now, there's some interesting ramifications in that. Okay? But anyhow, we're not supposed to have heathen stuff in our possession. What about, oh, come on here. There we go. What about heathen religious practices? When the people of Israel set up the golden calf, and Aaron said to the people, "These be thy gods, O Israel, that brought thee out of the land of Egypt." What did God say about that? The people have corrupted themselves. It didn't matter what term Aaron used to refer to the golden calf worship. He was saying, this is the God that brought you out of Egypt. No, it wasn't. Well, what about Christian yoga, Christian rock music, other things that are called Christian? We were just listening to a guy just a couple of days ago that was from India, where yoga originates, and he knew what he was talking about. He said the whole purpose of yoga is to make a personal connection with Shiva, one of the Indian gods, which is the god of destruction and a few other things. That's what yoga is for. How can you call that Christian? And Christian rock music, it doesn't matter what title they put on the song. If it has the devil's music, it's the devil's stuff. Okay? They weren't supposed to, God told the people of Israel, don't copy the worship practices of the tribes that are around you. Anyway, integrity in business. Deuteronomy 25:13-15. Thou shalt not have in thy bag diverse weights, a great and a small. Thou shalt not have in thy house diverse measures, a great and a small. Thou shalt have a perfect weight and a just weight. A perfect and just measure shalt thou have, that thy days may be lengthened in the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. And then in Leviticus 19:13, 35 and 36. You shall do no unrighteousness in judgment, in meat yard, which is a measurement of length, in weight, or in measure, which is a measurement of volume. That's what those words mean there. Just balances, just weights, a just ephah, and a just hin shall you have. I am the Lord your God, which brought you out of the land of Egypt. So they were supposed to be absolutely fair in their business dealings. And we as Christians should have the same reputation. For quite a while, for like about 5 years, I was working for my cousin on his farm in northern Minnesota, and I was hauling grain into the grain elevator, And one of the loads that I took in, there was some question. The guys working in the elevator, they had some question about the quality of the grain that I was bringing in from my boss, Ivan, my cousin. And the manager of the elevator said, if you can't trust Ivan, you can't trust anybody. And I was glad to hear that. He had a reputation for being absolutely honest with everything he did. Well, if you go to the store and you get whatever you are getting there, and then you get home and you find that you were overcharged for something, what do you typically do? You probably go back to the store and say, hey, I got this, but I paid this much for it, and that's more than I should have paid. Okay? That's understandable. What about if you get home and you find out that you were undercharged for something? That I got this thing and I didn't pay for it. I've had that happen several times. And I've gone back to Walmart and I said, hey, you didn't charge me for this. I want to pay for it. And they kind of look at me and, what am I going to do about this? They don't even know how to enter it in their system. What should we do? Pay for it. The third commandment, Exodus 20, verse 7, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless that taketh his name in vain. And I think that's elaborated on in some of these next verses here. Leviticus 19, verse 12, you shall not swear by my name falsely, neither shalt thou profane the name of thy God. I am the Lord. 2 Timothy 2:19, nevertheless, the foundation of God standeth sure, having this seal, the Lord knoweth them that are his, and let every one that nameth the name of Christ depart from iniquity. And then from Desire of Ages, page 556, those who profess to be followers of Christ and who deal in an unrighteous manner are bearing false witness against the character of a holy, just, and merciful God. If we call ourselves a Christian, that's kind of like taking God's name. But if we don't act like a Christian, it's taking his name in vain. When a couple gets married, the wife usually takes the name of the husband. But if she acts like she's not married to him, she has taken his name in vain. There's been a few times when we've had experiences. Linda was working in a nursing home years back, and one of the other nurses, they got to talking about one of the doctors that were there, and the people in the nursing home knew that my wife was a Seventh-day Adventist. And these two nurses, my wife and this other nurse, got talking about one of the doctors that was working in the nursing home. He'd come and make his rounds there. And this other nurse says, well, isn't Dr. Geyer a Seventh-day Adventist? Well, Dr. Geyer had grown up in an Adventist home, but he was an alcoholic, and he was using drugs, and he was womanizing, and what all, we don't know all that he was doing. And my wife said, well, if I call myself a Buddhist, but I don't act like a Buddhist, am I a Buddhist? This guy was not acting like an Adventist at all. So was he an Adventist? Okay. I was working in a lumber yard, and when we'd sit down for lunch, we'd talk about all kinds of things. And one of the guys, they asked me about, being a Seventh-day Adventist and everything. And one of the other guys there, he says, well, I used to date a Seventh-day Adventist girl, but she wasn't a very good Seventh-day Adventist. They know. We got to be careful. Respect for the elderly. Leviticus 19:32, thou shalt rise up before the hoary head and honor the face of the old man and fear thy God. I am the Lord. They were commanded to respect the older people. This is a picture of my parents. I kind of like having that in there. Anyway, we need to respect the elders. We were in a church in Minnesota, and it was a real small church, but a couple of Native Americans came there from one of the local reservations, and they were Christians. And it was just kind of interesting. The man, he asked me, who are the elders? Who are the elders in this church? And I thought he was saying the church elders, who are the elected elders, but he meant who are the older persons in this church. The Native Americans have great respect for the elders, for the older people, because they're kind of the backbone of the society. And we need to have respect for the elderly too. One more here. Home education, Deuteronomy 11, verse 18 through 21. Therefore, shall you lay up these